Can a war be lost not on the battlefield, but in a conference room, years before the final shot is fired? Can the fate of a nation be sealed by a single catastrophic miscalculation born of pure arrogance? For the Third Reich, the answer to both questions is a resounding yes, and it all began with the sound of laughter. The date is May 28, 1940, at the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, the powerful head of the Luftwaffe, sets down an intelligence report with undisguised contempt. The document details a fantastic claim from Washington. President Roosevelt is asking the U.S. Congress for the capacity to manufacture 50,000 airplanes a year. To the man who built the most fearsome air force in the world, the number is not just impossible, it's a joke. The Americans are desperate, he scoffs to his staff. They know nothing of war production. His laughter echoes in the halls of power, entirely unaware that he had just heard the starting gun for his own destruction. To understand Göring's derision, you have to understand the sheer absurdity of the number he was reading. That number wasn't born in a propaganda ministry. It was delivered to the world 12 days earlier, on May 16, 1940. As German panzers blitzed across France, President Franklin Roosevelt stood before a stunned Congress and drew a line in the sand not with soldiers, but with factory output. "I should like to see this nation," he declared, "geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Let's put that number in perspective. In all of 1939, the entire United States had produced just 3,611 military aircraft. Roosevelt was demanding a 14-fold increase in production, seemingly overnight. The Army Air Corps itself possessed only 1,700 combat planes, many of them hopelessly obsolete. The reaction, even among allies, was profound skepticism. America was a sleeping industrial giant, but it was still asleep. This wasn't a policy proposal, it was a demand for a national miracle. To Göring, and to many around the world, it sounded less like a threat and more like a fantasy. A fantasy requires a magician, and a miracle requires an architect. When President Roosevelt was asked who could possibly achieve such impossible production, his advisor Bernard Baruch had a three-part answer. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. He wasn't a general or a politician. He was William S. Knudsen, a Danish immigrant who had climbed the ladder from the factory floor to become the president of General Motors. Now, working for just $1 per year, he abandoned his $300,000 salary to serve his adopted nation as Roosevelt's production chief. His mission was deceptively simple: to take the brutal efficiency of Detroit's automotive assembly lines and apply it to the far more delicate and complex art of building warplanes. In Detroit, this quiet immigrant was already orchestrating the most ambitious industrial transformation in human history. And in doing so, he was preparing to answer Göring's laughter with a roar of factory furnaces. Göring's contempt wasn't an isolated opinion. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease infecting the Third Reich, an ideology so powerful it made them blind. Their fatal miscalculation didn't stem from a lack of intelligence, but from a willful refusal to believe it. Germany had a man in Washington, General Friedrich von Boedicke, their military attaché from 1933 to 1941, who sent a stream of accurate reports detailing America's burgeoning industrial might. In a stark December 1940 cable, he warned Berlin directly that American war production will reach unimaginable heights. His warnings were dismissed in Berlin as defeatist exaggeration. This blindness went to the very top. When Boedicke met with Hitler himself in February 1939 to discuss American potential, the Führer refused to listen to the intelligence assessment. Instead, he launched into a furious rant about American racial degeneracy. In the Nazi worldview, America was not a rival to be feared, but a mongrel nation to be scorned. Hitler proclaimed its people were half Judaized, half negrified, and therefore fundamentally incapable of sustained warfare. This was the core of their delusion. They believed their own racial mythology so completely that it rendered them incapable of seeing the industrial giant stirring before them. It was a self-inflicted blindness that would prove fatal. While Nazi ideology retreated into fantasy, American ambition was taking physical form on an unimaginable scale. Nowhere was this more true than on a stretch of farmland in Michigan. There, beginning on April 18, 1941, the Ford Motor Company began constructing a project that embodied the sheer audacity of the American war effort, the Willow Run plant. This wasn't just another factory, it was an industrial colossus. It became the world's largest factory under one roof, a single room sprawling over 3.5 million square feet with an assembly line that stretched for a full mile. But the scale of the building was dwarfed by the scale of the promise made by Ford's production chief, Charles Sorensen. He looked at this behemoth and made a declaration that shattered all existing norms of aircraft manufacturing. At a time when other factories struggled to produce one heavy bomber per day, Sorensen promised that Willow Run would roll a fully completed B-24 Liberator bomber off its assembly line every single hour. It was a goal so ambitious it bordered on insanity, a perfect symbol of a nation determined to achieve the impossible. A promise is not a production line, and ambition alone cannot build a bomber. The initial results at Willow Run were not just disappointing, they were catastrophic. The entire project seemed destined to become the most expensive failure in American history. The very first bomber to roll off the mile-long assembly line in September 1942 was a complete disaster, requiring a total and painstaking rebuilding. This wasn't an isolated incident. Systemic issues plagued the factory, with quality control failures reaching an astonishing 50%. The press and the public turned on the project with a vengeance. By February of 1943, the plant that had promised hundreds of bombers a month produced just 56. The symbol of American industrial might was quickly becoming a national embarrassment. Critics, seizing on the constant delays and quality issues, gave the factory a new, derisive nickname that perfectly captured the sense of doubt surrounding the entire endeavor. Will it run? For a dark and critical period, as the war raged overseas, the answer appeared to be a resounding no. But while critics scoffed, the engineers at Ford treated the looming disaster not as a failure, but as an engineering problem to be solved. The core challenge was complexity. An automobile had roughly 15,000 parts. The B-24 Liberator had 488,193. The traditional method of building aircraft one at a time was simply impossible at the scale they needed. So, they changed the entire philosophy of manufacturing. Instead of building one bomber, they broke it down into thousands of manageable subassemblies, creating interchangeable pieces that could be mass-produced simultaneously. This revolution in process was powered by a revolution in tools. Engineers developed new hydraulic riveting tools to speed up construction and designed prefabricated wiring harnesses that simplified the impossibly complex electrical systems. Slowly, painstakingly, they tamed the beast, implementing the moving assembly lines that had defined the auto industry. Their system was so robust, they successfully accommodated 578 different combat-driven design changes in 1943 alone without stopping production. The question, will it run, was about to be answered with the deafening roar of 1,000 engines. But the machines and the processes were only half of the miracle. The other half was a human revolution, a social transformation that shattered Nazi preconceptions about American society even more thoroughly than their factories shattered production records. Before the war in 1941, women made up less than 1% of the aircraft industry's workforce. By 1943, they were 65%. 310,000 women left their homes and poured into the factories. German intelligence, blinded by their rigid ideology, interpreted this as a sign of desperation. They saw women entering the workforce and predicted a collapse in quality, fatally misreading the democratic strength they were witnessing. This strength was personified by women like Rose Will Monroe, a riveter at Willow Run, who became the living embodiment of the Rosie the Riveter wartime icon. She wasn't just a symbol, she was a master of her craft, driving 3,000 rivets per shift with a staggering 99.5% accuracy. All across the country, women excelled at the detailed work of wiring, instruments, and inspection. At Douglas Aircraft, women inspectors slashed defect rates from 3.2% down to just 0.3%. They didn't just build the planes, they made them better. This was the true arsenal of democracy, not just machines, but free citizens, united in a cause the enemy could not even begin to comprehend. The final verdict on this new American reality would not be delivered by engineers or politicians, but by the men who had to face it in the sky. The first glimmers of the catastrophe to come for the Luftwaffe appeared during the Tunisia campaign in late 1942. Major Johannes Steinhoff, one of Germany's most respected aces, noted the alarming change in his diary. "The American pilots are no longer amateurs," he wrote. "Most disturbing, there are more of them every day." His words captured the twin horrors confronting the Luftwaffe. American skill was catching up to German experience, and American quantity was already insurmountable. This disturbing realization quickly accelerated into a strategic nightmare. On January 27, 1943, the first American bombers struck Germany itself. The mathematics of the production war were becoming brutally, inescapably clear. During the infamous Black Thursday raid over Schweinfurt, the Luftwaffe fought desperately and shot down 60 American B-17s, a staggering loss. But it was a hollow victory. The Americans could absorb that loss and replace every single bomber within 2 weeks. German tactical brilliance was being rendered meaningless by America's bottomless industrial depth. A new kind of war was being fought, and it was being won on assembly lines 5,000 miles away. The anecdotal fears of men like Steinhoff were soon confirmed by the brutal, undeniable language of numbers. The war in the air had devolved into a grim exercise in industrial arithmetic, and the equation was hopelessly, catastrophically stacked against Germany. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most brilliant commanders, laid the truth bare in a report to Göring. Germany, he stated, was losing approximately 1,200 fighters every month. In that same month, their factories, even at peak production, could only produce 1,000. They were operating at a net loss before even accounting for the enemy's strength. It was a war of attrition they were mathematically guaranteed to lose. On the other side of that equation was the American industrial colossus. While Germany was shrinking by 200 fighters a month, America was producing 2,500 fighters monthly while losing only 400 in combat. But the numbers told only part of the story. During the concentrated bombing campaign known as Big Week in February 1944, the Luftwaffe lost hundreds of fighters. But more critically, it lost approximately 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. America could build another plane in an hour. Germany could not create another combat ace in a decade. Skill, courage, and tactical genius were being systematically erased by the sheer, overwhelming weight of material. The monthly statistics painted a grim picture for the Luftwaffe, but the final tally for a single year revealed the true, horrifying scale of the industrial chasm. By 1944, the American production engine was running at its absolute peak, a roaring inferno of productivity that defied all precedent. In that year alone, American factories produced 96,270 military aircraft. Let that number sink in. In just 12 months, from January to December, a nation that started the war with an obsolete air force built more planes than the entire Third Reich managed to produce throughout 6 long years of total war. Germany's entire wartime output was approximately 94,677 aircraft. America surpassed that in a single year. This included over 16,000 four-engine heavy bombers and nearly 36,000 fighters. This wasn't incremental superiority, it was order of magnitude dominance. Germany wasn't just facing defeat, it was facing obliteration by an avalanche of aluminum. Nowhere was the final verdict of this industrial war delivered more decisively than in the skies over Normandy. On a single day, June 6, 1944, the abstract numbers of production became a terrifying physical reality. As Allied soldiers stormed the beaches, the invasion was supported by an air armada of 11,590 aircraft. The once mighty Luftwaffe, bled dry by years of attrition, could muster only 319 sorties in response. This was a 36-to-1 superiority. That wasn't a tactical advantage. It was industrial annihilation. The German soldier on the beach wasn't just fighting the man in front of him. He was fighting every factory in America, every rivet driven by every Rosie, every bomber that rolled off the line at Willow Run. In the months leading up to the invasion, preparatory bombing runs had dropped 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, more than all the bombs Germany dropped on Britain during the entire war. Göring's laughter in 1940 had been answered by a sky turned black with Allied aircraft and a continent about to be liberated by overwhelming material force. The war ended, and the story came full circle, back to the man whose laughter had echoed the Reich's arrogant confidence. Captured on May 8, 1945, Hermann Göring was initially defiant, maintaining that German technology had been superior, overcome only by brute numbers. But at the Nuremberg trials, that hollow excuse was systematically dismantled. The laughter from the Reich Air Ministry was about to be silenced by the weight of undeniable truth. Prosecutors presented him with the evidence of the very industrial miracle he had mocked. They showed him the charts, the endless columns of statistics proving America had outproduced Germany fivefold. Then they played the films. In the silent courtroom, the once powerful Reichsmarshal was forced to watch footage of the Willow Run assembly line, the endless procession of B-24s rolling into existence, one every hour. As the images flickered across the screen, prosecutors listed the German cities that had been destroyed by bombers from that single factory. Later, in his cell, prison psychologists documented his obsession. He would spend hours calculating ratios, fixated on the output of what he called that damn factory that broke our backs. When shown a final tally that America had produced over 800,000 aircraft engines to Germany's 241,000, Göring simply stared at the figures in silence. The mathematical reality of his defeat was absolute. The silence in his cell eventually gave way to confession. In extensive interviews with U.S. Army Major Kenneth Heckler, the man who had laughed at American potential was forced to articulate the scale of his miscalculation. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears." His obsession always returned to a single point on the map in Michigan. That single factory at Willow Run, he lamented, produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible. Stripped of his power and facing the gallows, his arrogance was finally replaced by a chilling clarity. In one of his final letters, written just hours before his scheduled execution, he provided the ultimate verdict on the production war. "The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess," he wrote. "We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories." His last recorded statement to the prison psychologist was perhaps the most telling epitaph for the Third Reich. He said, "We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed." The production miracle didn't end when the last bomb fell. In fact, its most profound legacy was just beginning. The techniques invented under the intense pressure of war fundamentally reshaped the modern world. Statistical quality control, developed to ensure the reliability of bomber parts, became a standard industrial practice across the globe. The principles of automation and mass production pioneered at Willow Run transformed global manufacturing for the next 50 years. The very people who achieved this victory would go on to build the future. The engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would later design the Saturn V rocket, and the women who riveted B-24s would raise the children who walked on the moon. This was not just a technological legacy, but an economic one. The vast industrial infrastructure built for war became the engine of unprecedented post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters that had forged bombers now produced materials for suburban housing. Chemical plants that made aviation fuel created the plastics for a new generation of consumer goods. The war production, rather than bankrupting America, had created a powerhouse. The victory in 1945 wasn't an endpoint. It was the launchpad for the American century, a new era of global leadership forged in the fires of its wartime factories. Hermann Göring's dismissal of American production capacity stands as history's most catastrophic miscalculation. His failure to recognize that a free, diverse, and cooperative society could achieve the impossible sealed the Third Reich's fate before the first bomber ever reached German skies. The final enduring lesson is a timeless one. Dismissing democratic nations as weak because they are peaceful, or underestimating a free people's productive capacity because they prefer prosperity to conquest, invites a fatal error. The story of the production miracle is the ultimate proof that a nation of immigrants and individuals, when united in common purpose, can bury tyranny under an avalanche of its own making. Göring's laughter in 1940 echoed through history as the sound of that miscalculation, the defining anthem of a regime that believed its own mythology could somehow overcome the cold, brutal, and undeniable laws of